the future of your brand. We've got Chase Jarvis from CEO of CreativeLive with us, and CreativeLive, online education, a lot of entertainment, inspiration, and connections. Really marvelous company. We've got with us also Jeriad Zoghby, who is the global lead of consumer goods for Accenture Interactive, designed implementation of growth experiences on digital. And from Ideoclick, we have the infamous Ben Winters, who is Managing Director of Client Success for Ideoclick. Their role is enhancing the role of companies with Amazon. So what a great group of people. And by the way, truly enjoyed the last panel. It was wonderful. So I'm going to start with Jeriad. Jeriad, what are your thoughts about the roles of the brands in the post-COVID era?
So Tom, you can hear me, right? Just want to make sure.
I can hear you fine. Yeah.
I have problems with Zoom sometimes, so I wanted to make sure. So roles of brands. Before COVID hit, we all saw, the acceleration. Anybody who's working in CPG saw it. It was priority focus on digital, D2C, first party data. And then COVID hits and everything just got accelerated. One of my clients, in fact, we went from planning out digital commerce being a core part of the digital brand strategy for like next year to in the middle of COVID saying, no, it has to happen right now. Like it became not a, how do we factor that in? Not content, truly brand and creative strategy coming into digital commerce. And so I think what we were watching is this transition happen much faster. And then when you look at these ecosystems starting to form with Amazon, they've already got commerce and paid media. They're starting to add social capabilities. Facebook throws Shopify in the mix. So now you also have social, paid media, commerce. I think we're going to see brands get from behind the pallets and actually have to engage consumers directly, which is long overdue. I mean, all those damn reviews that are out there are basically digital Post-it notes that customers leave behind. And at best, people respond to them. We don't really use them to the level we should. So I think the role of the brand is actually taking not only a hands-on approach, but the role is going to broaden dramatically. It's not going to be just top of the funnel. Everybody's going to realize the brand experience has to be everywhere.
Got it. Chase, your thoughts?
I think the role of the brand is not going to change. It's going to accelerate, not to dissimilar to what Jerry had said. The role of the brand has always been to serve their customers, serve consumers. And now we need to do that with increased differentiation, increased segmentation, increased depth and richness. To me, it's a really, really important time for companies to look at their values. These are whether it's margin or any number of axes you can evaluate your brand. Like, what are your brand values? And it's not a question of if you should change, it's what should you change. And now is a really important opportunity to look at your brand strategy, look at your roadmap, and decide proactively what you're going to do, what kind of company you want to be, and the relationship that you want to have with your consumers on the other side of this, because there will be another side, but it's increasingly segmented. Like tomorrow is a different day than today, and 2 weeks and 2 months from now are all going to be different. So let's be proactive with what it is that we want to be, what we want to stand for. And the best lens to me through doing that is your values. Do
you see brand values changing?
I want them to change because I think they've been very self-serving before. And as was eloquently shared on the last panel, there's going to be a lot of differentiation opportunities in the next chapter because a lot of the brands are not set up to evolve, and certainly not set up to evolve quickly. So I think there's an opportunity for those who have been, quick, maybe too quick in the past. I think now there's an opportunity to get out in front a little bit. And again, to me, just the lens of what do we stand for? How do we want to be seen in our consumers' eyes? And, specifically the question is, what is the role of the brand? The role of the brand is to serve their consumer. And I like to think of it as serve their community. Can you build a community? Because that's increasingly a lens through which consumers will make choices, is how do I feel about this brand? So I think there's a lot of opportunity, segmentation, depth, richness, community. And those are all things that if you weren't working on them before this thing started, you best get going now.
Ben, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curve. It came into me earlier as a question. I didn't get a chance to ask it. It's about search algorithms. In the new world of brands, in the next generation of brand positioning, how do you think search algorithms are going to change?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that we can anticipate further sophistication of search algorithms. I think that with the advancing sort of SKU reduction that's necessary for brands to focus on what is the short tail, we may see some adjustment in search algorithms, although I don't know that we'll see those adjustments happening on Amazon.
You think that's going to become a core competency of a brand? Their search algorithm capability?
It should be already.
Okay.
I think that brands that have not adapted for the reality of search algorithms will need to quickly catch up.
Hey, Thom, this is Jeriad. If I could throw in there too, I think this is,
please.
Yeah, to your point about a capability, I think probably most people on this call too, they would argue they understand the importance of the algorithms. Organizationally though, I would argue that most companies don't really get it. They get it that there's these algorithms that affect your rankings and affect how you're trying to get placement on the shelf, but most, especially in the large CPG companies, right? They all grew up with old school sales models. MDF, their job was to build their brand equity and use the MDF to get positioning on a shelf. And now all of a sudden these shelves are dynamic. They're not only leveled the playing field with an algorithm, but they're changing all the time. So the shelf isn't just about positioning for conversion, but it's also, you use panels to figure out where your next product development is coming from, when in fact, the digital shelf actually is probably the greatest, precursor to that. And small brands get that. Big brands at the organizational strategic level are still missing this.
Well, and that's another example. I just jump back in there. There's another example of, the COVID event accelerating trends that were existing in the marketplace. I think that, there was always a challenge for brand organizations to integrate sales and marketing efforts. And now the challenge is, how do they integrate e-commerce into sales and marketing efforts organizationally so that e-commerce channels aren't merely a digital afterthought where we're refactoring assets and communication modes and models from traditional over to digital. Digital now truly leads the way.
So let me take you guys to a very controversial question, which about brand organizations. And Jeriad, maybe you want to start, or Chase, you want to start? Let's start with Chase on this one. We have, in most cases, old world brand organizations. How are brand organizations going to change, gentlemen?
Are you sure you don't want Jeriad to go first?
I don't care. Whoever you want.
I nominate the smart guy.
Come on, Jeriad, go ahead. Go.
You know this because I'm watching these things happen in real time, and it is. Let's be honest. Historically, to that point, sales and marketing, and I'd love to hear people's feedback on this broader, but they have not generally communicated. In fact, there's been numerous times where, and talking to the e-commerce organization around content and creative, we find there's not a marketing person in the room. Sales organizations doing stuff. E-commerce team is basically just owns the digital channel in there. So to me, it's sales, marketing, e-commerce operations, and new product development. Those four groups historically have not worked together. And trying to create up an operating model where that addresses it, when the fact is that in digital, it's absolutely needed, and outside of digital, it's still fairly disconnected. I think it has no choice. I think the smaller brands, and I'm curious if Chase has seen it too, but I've seen some smaller brands, they're reinventing the model from scratch, right? So they're reinventing the product development process. They're reinventing how sales and marketing work together. It's the bigger brands that are the challenge. How do you help them transform to operate together? So I don't know how it should work. I know it has to, because if not, they're going to get eaten alive by what's coming down the pike.
For a brand startup, and anyone can answer this question, for a brand startup and their agility, for a large brand to become a small brand, how much restructuring has to occur? 50%, 70%? Do they have to tear apart the organization, rebuild it? What are your thoughts?
I would say you have to cannibalize yourself. And
yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I feel very passionate that it's a complete reinvention. And the reality is this is just think of brand guidelines. Let's go to something non-controversial. Let's go to Nike. I don't know if you've ever worked with them, but the brand guidelines are about this thick. It's like a 300-page manual. And that is about consistency. It's about how we are, what we do. This is what we stand for. And I understand the stand for, that's the values part. But all the other stuff, which is like, if you think of it in 80-20, it's the 80% that we prided ourselves, and I'm speaking from Nike's point of view, prided ourselves on consistency. All of that right now is a risk. It's risky. Like, now is the riskiest time in the world to play it safe. And if you can't actually evolve that other 80% of the business, whether that's strategically, whether that's organizationally, there's lots of different ways we can slice it. You are going to be very quickly as we saw some things surface during the pandemic, we're going to see some brands really get smacked around on that same sort of very, very short timeline when they've enjoyed, success for 20, 40, 60 years in some cases.
Ben, please go ahead.
One quick note on this. I think this is a great point, because what you're going to find is some companies who come out of COVID are going to focus on operations, which I totally get, but operations are literally the opposite of agility. Right. So if you're coming out of this and your whole goal is to streamline supply chain even more from a cost perspective versus an agility perspective and how your operations operate, you're going to find it's going to be, solution in the short term, but in the long term, you've basically put cement around your feet for the future. Because I couldn't agree more with what Chase was saying on that.
Ben, 10 years ago, brand organizations were driven by creative ideas. Let's assume they continue to be driven by some degree of creative ideas, but tomorrow, next generation, they're driven by heavy, heavy data analytics. How does the brand organization change? What are the skill sets requirements?
Well, I think that obviously there's some level of data analysis and data interpretation required, but what we're really talking about is not divorcing what drives brands from creative ideas, but how those creative ideas are sourced and disseminated, right? So the idea needs to originate based on data. And I think that when Jeriad started the conversation, it was about the requirement that brands be closer to their consumer, that it was incumbent upon brands to directly interact with their consumers. And I think that many of the ideas that will drive brands forward will come from looking at that data.
So, Jeriad, do you believe that brands and their positioning will be more important with consumers, with retailers, with channels, et cetera? How will brands interact with the market?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a report, I want to say it was last year, and I thought it was The Economist, talking about the value of creative, like had it declined? And I thought the report was valid in the analysis, not the conclusion. Creative hasn't declined in value. It's still really, you see it with what was done with Nike. It's more so that creative isn't everywhere it needs to be. As everyone shifts to these commerce channels and the brand storytelling and the creative's not there, you're weakening the value of what you're spending your money on. So I do think it's really less so of that there's any kind of decline in that stuff or the importance of it. It's that it's not trickling down to everywhere our consumers are. And you think about the younger generation who didn't grow up with all the Apple and the Nike ads and the equity that people my age have had. Mm-hmm. Many of them, this is their brand experience. They're on social, they're on commerce. And if it's not there, it's a miss. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's a huge.
Yeah. Hey, Thom, I want to pile into what Jeriad's saying.
Please.
I always try and follow the smart guy. I just re-say what he says, just a slightly different with a twist to it. I couldn't agree more, specifically around creative. Obviously, my company's called CreativeLive. I'm a lifelong creator and try and educate tens of millions of creators in the world. So I think you should take this with a grain of salt because I'm naturally over-indexed there. But the need for data has always been there, and we're seeing an abundance of data. And it's not, for a while there, it was about how to interpret the data. I think we're entering a third phase where customers are highly nuanced and that nuance is increasing. And so it's about interpreting that data to a customer story. Mm-hmm. And that is so core to the job of creative teams. And like Jeriad said, you need to put creative in a place where it didn't exist before, because it was good enough, 12 months ago that you were over 25 and college educated. And that is not enough segmentation right now.
Yeah.
And so the creative was very, very, while it was, you used data to, understand and to Ben's point, sort of originate the creative. But to me now there's virtually an infinite depth to what's possible, and to speak the native language of the new consumer, as Jeriad said. Also, this may, we're seeing new consumers emerge onto this, through this experience, and they're going to be where a lot of the dollars are going to be in the next chapter. So I like, you putting creative in places where you didn't think it was valuable, and doubling down on that as a differentiator.
So round robin real quick, and again, using one of Kevin's approaches. Jeriad, what are the three key attributes of the next generation brand organization?
One, that commerce is part of the brand strategy and not an afterthought. Two, that they can actually handle the scale that's coming. You're not just dealing with Amazon or Walmart or Nordstrom or Kohl's. You're going to eventually be in a world where you have to do this in a more automated scale fashion to know what your competitors are doing and what your consumers are saying. So your ability to scale operations is critical. And then if I had to pick a third one, you're in digital. You should be testing the living shit out of everything. There's no excuse for not testing your way in. For anybody who's scared of putting creative into your PDPs, test your way in. Do no harm for the short term, but ensure you're building your long-term brand storytelling. So.
Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, drafting off of what Jeriad said, we've got to be comfortable, and we're navigating this for our clients in real time, but we've got to be comfortable putting creative in places where it's not expected, PDPs and things like that. We've got to be testing in real time. I think that brands also need to be really prepared, if they're not already, to recessionary shopping behavior from consumers. And then the path is paved through collaboration between disparate departments inside of large brands that are not typically collaborating. We hit that point earlier. So I think that those brands and those brand organizations that haven't embraced those things at this point, that it's time to work some overtime.
Chase, what are your thoughts?
Creative. Two gentlemen before me said it. Dynamic. They said it in a slightly different way, but they both said it. The last one is a willingness to change. I think that is the biggest one. That's where a lot of folks are going to lose. There's this is the way we've done it. And I think the folks that hang their hat on that are going to struggle.
Okay. Last question. It's now May of 2020. You're advising brand organizations on what they must do in the next 90 days. Each of you take a minute and describe your recommendations. Who wants to go first?
Ben does.
Ben does. There you go, Ben. You go first.
That's an easy one, Thom. Realistically, the advice differs depending on the starting point of the brand. So it's going to be different for small brands versus big brands. I think that the speed with which you can adapt, the speed with which you can interpret data, and not to sound like a broken record, the extent to which you can collaborate are going to be important points for your future success.
Jeriad.
I'm going to cheat a little bit. So next 90 days, you need to know that the battle right now is the digital shelf. I think everybody on this call knows that. Small brand, big brand, you're not winning that shelf. That's no longer a nice, interesting channel. It is the shelf. But I'm going to cheat and also say that you have to look to the horizon. The next big battle is digital talent. No matter what size of company you're at, it's going to come up and haunt you, and you cannot wait for that piece.
And Chase.
Decide what you're going to do differently and start to become that starting yesterday. I think so many people want to wait and see. I think in here, perfection is the enemy of good. And in a world that favors speed, dynamism, a willingness to change, identifying what you're going to do differently. What are you going to stand for? What different, what what lens are you going to see this new world, whether it's the digital shelf, whether it's the algorithms, whether, there's a handful of axes under which you could be different, deciding proactively what you're going to do and starting on that journey yesterday.
One really quick final question. What percentage of brand organizations are prepared to make this change? Ben?
I think that I'm an optimist. I think 60%.
Jeriad?
I'd say less than 10, and that probably 60% want to. I think they are. So.
And Chase?
20%.
20%. A lot of movement. Panel, what a great time. Thank you so very, very much for the conversation. Absolutely spectacular.